Is there a man there offering to help you with your yard work? Are there smiles all around? In the image in your mind's eye, does your first thought go to what can you give to this person? Or is it what can you get from this person? Do you see the opportunity for a new relationship or thoughts of dread because of the differences in the expectations that you might have for each other? We all have stories to tell, good and bad, with people that we would call neighbors. But what about the people who live beyond our own property line? The people up the block, on the other street, or from another town? Are they your neighbors? Okay, so you go on vacation. You rent an expensive beach house on a quiet street. You've spent more than you care to discuss on the rental property, and you have great expectations for this time away from home. Are the people in the house rental next to you your neighbors? They're strangers after all, and their relationship is most unlikely. So, well, what about if your vacation is really far away, perhaps in another country? I think you get the point, right? One time we were on vacation in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and we were waiting for a table in a very busy restaurant. It was so busy that we were waiting on a staircase that led to an upper deck that overlooked the ocean. Unprovoked, this woman grabs my arm and says, "Hey, I'm Methodist." And I thought, oh, okay, right? It caught me so off guard. She then mentioned how much she loved my cross and flame necklace. And it was then I realized that the Methodist cross and flame that I wore gave her an unexpected, surprised feeling of home. And she felt that she must share the bond that we had, both being Methodists. And obviously, we were best friends, right? And as Christians, I guess she's right. We spent the next 30 minutes sharing stories, and by the time we got our table, I did feel like I had made a new friend. Was she my neighbor? Well, yes. Today's Luke text, the question is raised, who is my neighbor? And Jesus gives us a story, a parable. The parable of the Good Samaritan. It's a story of a man beaten and left half dead on the side of the road. Important people pass by and nobody helps him. First a priest, then a Levite. Wow, if you stop there, it's a really awful story, right? But we do know, in the end, someone does help. A Samaritan. A person who was a most unlikely person to be the one to help. Now, if you've been brought up in the church, you know the story well, and you know what it means when I say, be a good Samaritan. And even those who don't know the Bible story know that a good Samaritan is someone who helps a stranger. We hear the phrase on the news when someone does an act of kindness, mercy, or love that goes above and beyond what is expected. Yes, we all know what it means to be a good Samaritan. Jesus uses this parable in response to the lawyer's question. But first, let's consider the initial interaction that leads up to the telling of the parable. It begins as the lawyer tries to trick Jesus by asking him what he must do to inherit eternal life. And Jesus in return asks him, what does the law say? Now here's something I learned this week while doing my research. In Jesus' time, to be a lawyer was to be a Bible expert. Did you know that? It was someone who was schooled in the laws of Moses. Right? The Hebrew Bible, the Torah, the first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The lawyers were the ones to interpret the law of Moses and how they could then apply it to everyday life. So this lawyer was well versed in the scriptures, and he was easily able to respond and tell Jesus what it said. He summed up the law by quoting the original covenant God made with the people of Israel. You know it. I know it. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your strength and with all your mind. And then he adds, and your neighbor as yourself. Now, this is the quote from the passage found in Deuteronomy 6. Every Jewish household knew this as the established covenant with God. In mainstream rabbinic Judaism, mezuzah is affixed to the doorpost of Jewish homes to fulfill the biblical commandment that says to write the words of God on the gates and doorposts of your house. The word mezuzah literally means doorpost. That's what that word means. And it serves as a reminder to live a spiritual and or religious life. It's a reminder to think about God. In this parable story, the man that was beaten and left for dead was a stranger, unknown to each of the people that passed him by. Neither of the people who passed by was willing to stop and help. It's a pretty harsh story that shows the passers-by as heartless and selfish. And each passed by intentionally crossing the street to avoid the man, to avoid the situation. And Jesus' parable specifically names a priest and a Levite as those who passed by. Until we get to the Samaritan, who of course is the hero in our story. But both the priest and the Levite were two types of people who would have been expected to be the ones to step up and help. They were the religious folks, people who professed faith in God. First, we need to know that the prevailing opinion among scribes and Pharisees of that day was that the term neighbor was used to describe the righteous people only. It wasn't meant to describe everyone. So if you were a neighbor, you were righteous. That meant if you were not righteous, you were wicked. And according to them, the wicked included sinners, tax collectors, prostitutes, Gentiles, and especially Samaritans. All were hated because they were considered to be enemies of God. Now, the Pharisees had elevated this hostility toward the wicked to a status of being a virtue. And the Levite was a descendant of Aaron from the tribe of Levi, and they assisted the priests in the work of the temple. And some of them were actually raised in the temple. So these were religious people. So in this parable, Jesus is teaching us not only about neighbors, but another lesson about loving our enemies. In Matthew 5, where we have the teachings of Jesus, we call it the Sermon on the Mount. At verse 43, Jesus says, "You've heard it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you." This was a new concept, a hard concept, a challenge for people at that time. Let's face it, loving our enemies is a challenge for all people, all the time. Jesus' answer to the lawyer was more than a lesson in helping his fellow man. Through this parable, Jesus abolishes the excuse for denying care for a fellow human being, even if that person is considered an enemy. Jesus' reply makes it clear that each person has the responsibility to see others as a neighbor. Today, we too are challenged to expand our minds and our hearts and to accept all people as neighbors. Each person has the responsibility to love another, not only as the first and greatest commandment, but in response to another human being's well-being. I can't help but wonder what our churches would be like, what our communities would be like, what our denomination would be like if we looked at each and every person as a neighbor instead of as a possible enemy. Scripture does not tell us that the Samaritan was special. What made him special, however, was that he did not pass by, but instead he took it upon himself to do something. He was willing to get involved. We can quote Scripture and talk as much as we want about God, but unless we are willing to get involved in the lives of In the book of James, faith and works are set forth as both being necessary as we live as disciples of Jesus Christ. James asks us, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can faith alone save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill, and yet you don't supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. As Methodists and as Christians, we are called to work for justice in the world. Faith without works, compassion without action, is an empty profession, not a genuine response to the faith that comes from our salvation. The Good Samaritan ignored all the reasons the others did nothing and stepped up to help. We're all capable of doing the same thing. The Samaritan provided for the man's needs and went back to his own work. So this Samaritan was a human being who loved and cared for his neighbor through his actions. The Good Samaritan went above and beyond what he could have done. His generosity is outstanding. Dressed the wounds. Let the man ride his animal while he walked to the inn. And he took care of him. He paid for his stay while he recuperated and was even willing to come back and pay more if necessary. You see, for a Samaritan to even travel this road was unusual. Very unusual. The Samaritans were risking not only the dangers of thieves and robbers who had even attacked this man, but also the hostility of others that would be unkind as they traveled this road. Nevertheless, this Samaritan goes against all social conventions and does what the others should have done. He is extravagantly generous with his own resources. It may seem funny that Jesus answered a direct question with a story rather than a straightforward answer. But I think in the offering of the story, Jesus opens up the original question to include other questions. Instead of the simple question that was posed, who is my neighbor, this parable now offers us lessons on what we are called to do for our neighbor. We can ponder questions about what it means to live in community with others and in the world as if everyone is our neighbor. And as we consider the parable, we identify who are the neighbors in our own lives that we may be called upon to help. And when we are called upon to help, will we be a good neighbor? Will we show extravagant, generous love in every interaction with others? Do we care about the needs of others? Or would we rather cross the street and not get involved in another person's problems? These are self-reflective questions that help us to look at our own Christian character and the response of our faith to see if we're putting our faith into action with acts of mercy and love. The parables of Jesus are rich in lessons that we can directly apply to living out our own lives as disciples of Jesus. The parable of the prodigal son teaches us of the love and forgiveness of the Father, offering us a glimpse into the character of God as our loving parent. And in comparison, the parable of the Good Samaritan teaches us the importance of seeing others for who they are as we evaluate the way we treat all people. Are we accepting and welcoming to others, considering everyone our neighbor? The Good Samaritan helped out of his love for humanity and his empathy. He saw a need and he responded. Not for fame or glory, just taking care of another human being. After speaking this brief parable, Jesus again addresses the lawyer, and in verse 36 asks him, well, which of these do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And the lawyer responds, the neighbor was the one who showed him mercy. He got it right. Jesus said, go and do likewise. And let us learn from this example and go with open hearts and open hands, looking for neighbors, near and far. Thanks be to God. Amen.